Welcome to the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar. During today's webinar, you're able to ask our panelists questions during the session. All questions, along with the webinar recording, will be published a week from today's showing. And at this time, for the RSSO multi-tenancy configuration best practices, I will turn it over to Mizraim Nuno to take us through this content.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Mizraim Nuno, and I work at BMC Software as a staff technical support analyst. In today's webinar, I'll be talking about the multi-tenancy configuration and best practices in Remedy single sign-on. In our agenda, we'll cover the RSSO multi-tenancy overview. I'll be talking about user roles, best practices configuration and demo, and of course, I'll be sharing some references respectively. So let's start. What is multi-tenancy? Multi-tenancy in software refers to a software architecture in which a single instance of software runs on a server and serves multiple tenants, where a tenant is a group of users who share a common access with specific privileges to the software instance. Remedy single sign-on is supported in multi-tenancy mode, where a single application instance serves multiple tenants and guarantees data isolation between them. In a multi-tenant mode, each tenant has its own configuration with its own list of realms, settings related to the cookie name, OAuth client, sessions, administrator users, and so on. We have here a multi-tenancy diagram in RSSO, which basically I start with the SaaS administrator that manages the SaaS tenant. And as a SaaS admin, you may need to create multiple tenants in RSSO to isolate the data with a single instance of RSSO. The tenants in this diagram represent Remedy SSO configuration instances which are isolated from each other, but are physically saved on the same RSSO server. The SaaS tenant cannot be deleted, modified, as it's the predefined tenant available on the RSSO server. Therefore, we do not recommend using the SaaS tenant for data segregation, neither attempting to delete it, because basically we're not capable of that. The tenant 1 and tenant 2 are customer tenants created by a SaaS administrator user. The tenant 1 administrator user can log into the RSSO admin console of tenant 1 and make changes to its configuration, and the same will occur with tenant 2. The SaaS administrator user can set up configuration for any tenant on the RSSO server by switching to the admin console of a selected tenant. We'll see that in a bit. Let's go to the user roles. In RSSO, we have two user roles. The first one is the SaaS administrator, which is our administrator profile, which basically for the users that have such role, we have full rights to create, activate, delete, or temporarily delete, deactivate other tenants. The users with this role can view and change the configuration of any tenant registered on the RSSO server. From the SaaS tenant, when we select the SaaS tenant, the SaaS administrators can create other SaaS administrator users. From customer tenant, when we select that a specific customer tenant, the SaaS administrators can create a tenant administrator users. We'll share that in a demo. Here, then, we have our second role, which is a tenant administrator. The tenant administrator users will have full rights to manage local users for realms in their tenant, as well as these tenant admins cannot do anything else in the RSSO admin console. As you can see in this diagram, we have the two roles, basically, three users with two different roles, the SaaS admin and the tenant admin. in which the sysadmin, you can see in our Remedy single sign-on tool panel, the sysadmin has the full privileges to the application console, whilst on the other hand, the tenant 1 and 2 admins basically has the limited scope to the local user section, in which this one allows the tenant admins to create, edit, or delete users and groups for the one or more existing realms that could be inside the tenant admin. So now we are moving to the best practice configuration steps for multi-tenancy. And this section of our agenda, I am subdividing it in 4 main tasks, in which we'll start with the very first, which is assess and collect the environment requirements for the tenant. For this, I would like to show you what we have in this lab and how I assess my needs to create as me as a sysadmin to implement different solutions. You can see in this multi-tenancy diagram, this is our RSSO diagram. You can see that we have on the left our SaaS tenant, which is our default tenant, and we have these other 2 in our lab. We'll see them in detail. The second one is My Health Insurance Ltd. This is a sample company. Same applies for the Worldwide Communications Ltd. It's another sample company that all will be stored on the same RSSO server, same database, no database replication. And therefore, we need to have a clear understanding of what we have on our RSSO instance, on our tenants and the companies we want to protect, what their needs are for each one. Let's say for company number 1, which I don't have the sample name here, which is inside the SaaS tenant, you can see it. That company, let's say, wants to use SAML authentication, just an IDP provider authentication method, and their specific network policies and requirements are set. They have a specific cookie, they want to access through a specific URL, and the same will occur with the other 2 companies that we're using in our environment. We need to have clear understanding of that. Some of the details will be clear on our demo as we see it on the run once we start with it. Okay, we have gone through our task number 1, which is assess and collect the environment requirements for the tenant, in which we saw our RSSO diagram where we have our 3 tenants. So what we're going to do next is to prepare the environment for the tenant. Right? We're going to pick 1 tenant out of 3 to have a look at the system in terms of what we need to configure or make sure that we have the configuration properly in order to achieve our proper tenant configuration. So the plan is to take a look at our AR system first and then to our RSSO server. So here we go. Okay, here we are in our AR system, in which this AR system basically is just a single server. This is a standalone configuration. And this tenant basically is our My Health Insurance tenant. This is 1 AR system and 1 mid-tier server, which is on a different server. But both comprehend the My Health Insurance ITSM solution for My Health Insurance company, right? One of the requirements that we could have from the customer is basically to adapt at their specific URL, specific domain, cookie name. Let's say, for example, could the company uses the My Health Insurance Ltd.net, right? So we need to convert our RSSO instance to regard this specific network configuration. So here in this AR system, basically what I did is I added this entry on the host file, which is my health insurance AR system.ltd.net. And same I did for my health insurance web ltd.net. We can see below, right? So having done that, basically it works as a DNS configuration. The proper way though is to have the DNS configuration on the network, right? To have that specific requirement. So having said that, let's go to our RSSO server. Okay, here we are in our RSSO server, in which what I need to ensure is that we have my healthinsurance.ltd.net, so I can align the RSSO with customers' natural configuration, which is my healthinsurance.ltd.net. Right? I need to adapt to the already set ITSM solution. So that will basically serve as a basic requirement for the tenant preparation. And from there, then we can move to our next task. Okay, we have concluded our task number 2, which was about to prepare the environment for the tenant. Now, we need to move to our next task, which is to create the tenant and configure its elements in RSSO admin console. In this task, I'll be demoing in the RSSO console how I built my tenants, and I'll be showing all the details and steps I took and explain the concepts behind it. So let's go. Okay, here we are in our Remedy SSO console admin page login. And before I log in with my admin credentials, I like to start by quickly highlight a concept in terms of the instances. This RSSO URL basically is my main instance. That means that the RSSO server name is ssgbny.bmc.com and uses .bmc.com cookie domain. So as my main instance, I am alluding to the SaaS tenant or default tenant. So having said that, I'm gonna log in with the default credentials we all know, the admin user. Okay, here you can see we logged in into our admin console. We start with the general section, right? You can see right here in the version we have 2002 version, build 25, login as an admin user, and besides the version number on the left, we should have a legend for the tenant whenever we select the tenant, but that legend is activated at that specific time. If we do not select it and we log in as default as we're doing right now, we are logging as a SaaS tenant. So we can have it explicitly told in the legend or just omit it as we have it right now. Having said that, we're going to go through the current configuration we have right now. In the basic, we have the bmc.com cookie domain. In advanced, we have the cookie name. This cookie name should be something that you can name, but the requirement is that it needs to be unique, right? So if we have other tenants and have the same cookie name, basically it will cause a conflict for RSSO to identify the requests that are coming from. RSSO won't be able to detect if it's going for tenant A or tenant B or tenant C in case the cookie name is repeating in more than one case. So it's always recommended to have it unique. And we have here our admin authentication section. In this admin authentication section, I have configured an LDAP instance and an internal as a second or fallback authentication method. The internal, it's easier to identify which is the admin user. The default admin user we have on RSSO pertains to the internal list authentication method. Also, another internal authentication method could be any given admin user we have. Let's take a quick look here at the admin user. It could be the admin, as I mentioned, the default one. You can see that we cannot delete it because that's the default. And we have also Mizraim and Toto admin users for the SaaS tenant, which also I can edit or modify as per my needs, right? So going back to admin authentication, I can use either of both depending on which one I want first. It doesn't matter, it depends on how I want to administrate it. Then we move to the realm. Here quickly we have the three realms, BMC realm 1, BMC realm 2, and the start realm, which is for true site. Right now we're focusing on the BMC realm 1 as our SaaS company, or our company that we have in our SaaS tenant. That this is a full remedy full stack solution, right? That's the one we are using as a SaaS company. Now let's go to sessions. We refresh, we have no sessions. We have local users, right? No local users neither for BMC Realm 1 nor BMC Realm 2, but on Star Realm for TrueSite, we have our TrueSite users, TrueSite presentation server users and groups respectively, but nothing on the other BMC realms as those are not needed yet. In the OAuth section, we have the basic settings we need to go through to configure a OAuth authentication. This is normally for clients, right? Basically, once I configured my access token timeout and at my specific needs, we set our OpenID issuer URL. Basically, that would be like the basic requirement for the OAuth. The OpenID issuer URL basically stands for the RSSO server URL. In this case, I'm highlighting that I'm using the SaaS instance, which is my server name. This is the RSSO server name ssubny.bmc.com. So I'm using that as an issuer URL. I have my clients created, one for Postman application, the other one is for multi-domain configuration I have. We're not focusing that much on it, just for functionality. And we have another for Developer Studio. No tokens granted because OAuth is not being used at the moment, but otherwise it should generate a token ID for the sessions we have. In this case, the same as we could happen for a normal user, that those are reflected in this realm section. Same case with open IDs. This is a JWT case IDs that we have, right? Those are for the clients, for the OAuth clients. Once we have these requirements set, we can use OAuth too. But let's move on to the Launchpad section. In the Launchpad, we have all our applications, right? My URLs that are governed by the three realms I have in SaaS tenant. You can see the star realm for TrueSite. This is I have just one URL, the TrueSite presentation server homepage. I have the BMC2 of the BMC realm 2, and the rest that are from coverservices.com on the tenant column pertain to the BMC realm 1. But those are not showing here because as I'm using explicitly tenant name, which is required for the DWP catalog, those appear this way, but those for the BMC realm 1. In the admin user section, I just showed it a while ago, we have these two created admin users, Mizraim and Toto, which are auxiliary admin users, right, besides the default one. In the audit section, you can see that we have a table of records that RSSO has logged for any sessions modifications that have gone through lately or as of I started the audit. Now let's go back to the last one and our most important for this topic, which is the tenant. As you can see right now, we have the 3 tenants pre-created for this demo, which in the very first one, I have the SaaS tenant, which is our main tenant, right? And you can see in the host, it's using the IP by default 127.0.01, which is the local host, right? And that local host alludes to the main RSSO instance or server. That is the same IP address for this one, for this server name, right? This server name has, well, basically, as I said, this is my main RSSO server that will work exclusively for SaaS tenant. Now, I have my health insurance and worldwide communications, tenant 1 and tenant 2 respectively. Okay, though you can see in the status column, those are enabled, right? The description, it tells you what they are. When we want to add a tenant, basically just hit the add tenant button, type a meaningful name that makes sense to the tenant we are working on. The host name here is very important. I'm gonna show you why. The description is optional and the checkbox for enablement. When you hit save, automatically you get an ID, a tenant ID. Basically, let me show you how I have it. For example, let me edit the tenant I create. Let's say I'm gonna create my health insurance tenant. I type the name, something meaningful, right? That tenant ID is the one that it's been created at the save time, right? The host name, this is basically an alias of my main RSSO server or SaaS instance, which is this one. This server is the same as this one, right? And it's really important to use the server name plus the cookie domain, because that's the way that RSSO will track all the requests pertaining to any of the realms inside that tenant, which is my health insurance. I'm going to show you why. It is aligned here along with the general with the cookie domain. As I show you, for example, for the SaaS tenant, this one uses the bmc.com, but here we're using ltd.net. Once we click save, okay, we have our tenant created, right? Then at this point, we need to select the tenant, right? Okay, we select tenant number 1 and let's go to start a configuration. We need to start with the general section for the tenant number 1, which is my health insurance company. And as a requirement that we already reviewed in our task number 2 and 1 for the best practices configuration section, we're looking at, we need to use the ltd.net because this is a requirement for the ITSM solution, right? Therefore, we set the cookie domain here. We configure these session settings respectively in the advanced. I ensure that I have a cookie name unique. I can name it as I want. It could be anything random, but it must be unique. Otherwise, it could create a conflict with other tenants that are using the same cookie name, and whenever a user just sends a request to log in into any of the applications that are protected by RSSO, and RSSO will detect duplicity on the cookie name. It won't be able to differentiate to which tenant the session pertains to. I'm not even scooping into the realm yet. So that's the really importance that I'm trying to emphasize here on the cookie name. Okay, having said that, let's move on to the admin authentications. You can see the admin authentications as it is occurring for the SaaS tenant. You can see right here in this section. I'm using right now my health insurance, and now that I choose this tenant, I configure my list of admin authentications. The admin authentications that I'm doing inside the tenant will only affect this local user section, as I mentioned earlier. And I can use admin users or tenant admin users coming from either an LDAP instance. In this case, this represents my health insurance LDAP instance, right? Plus the internal users that I opt to create inside the health insurance tenant for local management, user and group management. Okay, moving on. On the realm, we have it here pretty straightforward. We just have created this a BMC realm 4, right, which has basically my set of application domains explicitly set, which is my health insurance web ltd.net, which is the mid tier, my health insurance ars.ltd.net, which is the AR system, and these two are the aliases for the first two records respectively, right? And also I added here my RSSO instance following with the cookie domain, that it's aligned. I have to make sure that it is. Now, in the after logout URL, I just set it just to go to my ARSys. We're gonna test this functionality. It's really simple, right? And I'm using my health insurance web, my mid-tier.ltd.net/ARSys, right? Authentication AR system, nothing fancy, nothing to worry about, right? In the sessions, I don't have anything in sessions. Local users, you can see in BMC Realm 4, I'm only capable to see BMC Realm 4 because that's the only realm I have as I'm looking inside the tenant, my health insurance, right? Let's go to OAuth section. This OAuth section, I have to configure a client in order to communicate my main RSSO instance, ssgb.ny.bmc.com, right? To communicate it with my ITSM solution that it's basically set in a completely different network, which is the ltd.net, right? And different domain as well. So I use, as opposed to the SaaS tenant, instead of using the CLM, AOS, ssgbny.bmc.com, I'm using my health insurance, which is my tenant assigned for this one. So this is my RSSO server alias, basically, but for this specific tenant. Configure my timeout settings. Let's go back to the clients. And the client, how I created, when you want to create a client, you just have to click register a client. You just need to tell the client name, if it's native, if it's public client. We're using in this case, a public is not a native client. So we just have to leave it blank for now, for the purpose we use for multi-tenancy and multi-domain, that is embedded concept in it, but I'm not getting profound in that topic because it's a completely separate one. We enable it and we add our list of URIs, right? We had a URL and type the URL. I mean, we don't need to add it right now. And hit save. Okay, before hitting save, click the OpenID. That's the scope used for OpenID Connect. This checkbox is exclusively useful in case you want to use authentication from end users. So that's critical. If we want to use end user authentication, we have to enable this. Once we hit save, we get a client secret and client ID that we need to save. So Once we save it, we have the client ID and we have also the client secret or certificate that it's right here. We can access to it because this one needs to be set in our application agents, RSSO agents, in order to be able to talk between those servers and the RSSO server. But that's another topic. Configure my OpenID. Okay. I have it configured. No tokens right now. And I have generated my JWK ID. This is also part for the client in order to be able to communicate with other systems. In this case, I need to be able to communicate via this client ID with the My Health Insurance IT solution because it is in a different network. So I need to be able to talk in a secure manner, not only by just doing the realm authentication, which is basically our second step once we have this network outside network communication requirement, right? So basically what happens first is all authentication happens via this client, and then we are able, RSSO will be able, once authenticates the client with the other system, basically RSSO will be able now to authenticate the users by the authentication methods we have in our realms. Either of the realms, one or n realms we have. That's the mechanism in a high level. Then we go to Launchpad. We have nothing to add here, nothing to worry about. In the admin users, the admin user, I create one local user or internal user, as we can see it as a sort of a authentication method for the admin administration, which is the health insurance admin user. Let's do a quick test. For example, I want to log in as health insurance administrator, right? But reaching my specific health insurance RSSO instance. I'm opening a new tab to showcase this, and at the same time we'll confirm the user's role functionality. So in the RSSO remedies I hit, this is my main instance, worldwide communications for Tenant 2, and my health insurance for Tenant 1. This is the one. Here I'm selecting my health insurance limited remedy SSO. This is my RSSO instance. You can see right here. I go directly to the RSSO admin console, right? Loads the page, and I'm gonna log in with the tenant administrator user that pertains to health insurance. I type my credentials and I can log in. And as I said before and show you, basically the scope for the local users is the only one we have for the tenant users. So here as a tenant user administrator, I can't either create, edit, or modify users or roles pertaining to the realm or the realms I could have inside that health insurance instance or tenant. Okay. So right now we have nothing. We're not doing anything because it's not necessarily, this is something we can do it later. I mean, it's not critical for this demo. So I'll log out from this instance, close my tab, and in the audit section here for my health insurance tenant 1, I have nothing yet because I have not done with anything with the admin users, right? So let's go back to the tenant and let's do another checkup. The same thing will apply to our worldwide communications tenant 2. You can see if I select it, I will be able to see ltd.com, a completely different configuration, the unique cookie name, a different realm. This is realm number 5 for a different ITSM solution, very similar to my health insurance. Very similar, though different network and different cookie domain. As you can see, ltd.com, while the other one we're using ltd.net, right? Sessions, nothing. Local user, exactly the same functionality. The OAuth 2 section, exactly the same as the My Health Insurance. Launchpad, exactly the same. Everything exclusively pertaining to this worldwide communications tenant, right? Admin user, I have my worldwide com ltd admin, and we can test the login as well. It's exactly the same functionality. In the audit section, I don't have anything neither that I have recorded yet. No activity modification, creating rules, groups, haven't created any users, haven't deleted them. So that's the reason why it's not recorded here. Now moving back to tenant, I can choose the SaaS tenant again, as I did it in the beginning of this section. I can have it explicitly the SaaS tenant, but I can see the same information, BMC RAM 1, 2, and my star for true site, right? Which is basically the same as if I wouldn't have it, this legend here explicitly shown, but that's what the functionality is, just to tell in which tenant you are if you're managing tenants, so that you can have a specific screen of what you have in your configuration. Keep in mind that we're using an admin, a SaaS administrator user. This is and we can look at all the tenants and do modifications because that's part of the profile we're able to. So having covered this portion, I would like to show you some login to the different solutions we have. 3 different tenants. Great. We have covered our task number 3, and now we're going to go through our last task, which is to validate and test. For this, what I'm going to do is to show you the browser and log in to the 3 different ITSM solutions that are in each tenant to validate this whole configuration. Let's go. Here we have our browser using Google as a sample. Right now, in these bookmarks folders, I have my different logon URLs already saved. So let's try with my health insurance first, to the remedy login, the one we configured along, to test the connectivity. As you can see, we have the redirection to the prompt login page, and you can distinguish my health insurance by this landscape back screen. Let's type with some caps here. I am logging in with the demo user, AR demo user. And you can see right now that I'm logged in without a problem. Not a problem. Okay. Once I'm logged in, I'm going to open up a new tab and go to the same stack. Okay. I'm going to use the worldwide communications remedy login, another completely different solution, reaching out the same RSSO instance. And you can see in this one, for worldwide communications, we have our demo user to log in. This is a completely different ITSM solution in which you can see right now how we access to this system. Keep in mind that in these 2 ones, basically the authentication process happens in 2 different steps. One is with the OAuth client authentication just to identify the RSSO and the ITSM that both are in different networks and you are using also different cookie domains mainly, right? Once this handshake occurs, then we're able to do the user authentication as we just did it in these both use cases. Now I'm using the BMC.com realm, which is the one pertaining to my SaaS tenant. And for this, I go to my normal Remedy login. As you can see, this backend screen, this is a full stack. I am logging as administrator, which is my demo user basically. Okay, hit login. And you can see that I logged in without problems. Now, let's validate in RSSO admin console. For this, I open a new tab and I'm going to open my SaaS instance of RSSO because I need to take a look at the 3 tenants, what's going on, and not on each one. I can do from each one, but I should do 3 different logins. So with the SaaS admin, I can cover the 3 checkups we're going to do in a single login. That's the advantage of working with a SaaS admin user. So let's type with an LDAP that I have configured on my admin authentication section, sorry. You can take a look. I have the SaaS tenant by default. And remember, with this user, I log in. This is for the normal bmc.com, right? I log in with, this is bmc.com. I log in with the SaaS tenant on the tenant instance. So if I go to the sessions, you can see the administrator for pertaining to BMC Realm 1, right? The OAuth, if I go to tokens, no tokens because when I'm using the same cookie domain on RSSO and my ITSM or DWP or any Remedy application solution, right, there's no need to use this OAuth. This is just for the ones that are outside network and also has a different cookie domain. That's the mandatory part for this. Okay, so having confirmed we logged in successfully with our administrator, let's go to the tenant. Okay, select the tenant explicitly, SaaS tenant, which is the same. You can see the session is the same administrator, no change. This is just that we're using the tenant functionalities. That's the reason why we have this legend, as already explained. Let's take a look at my health insurance company. Let's go to the sessions. In the sessions, we can see that we log in with Mizraim, which is on this session. We log with Mizraim in AR user Mizraim pertaining to the BMC Realm 4, right? And as the first 2 tenants, this and this require OAuth, we're going to take a look at the OAuth tokens. You can see the token it was just generating for the user ID Mizraim, right? BMC pertaining to the BMC Realm 4, right? The same occur if I want to be able to see what happened with the user demo for worldwide solutions, communications, you should be able to see its login list because it's protected. This is how the data is segregated among the tenants. That's the secure part of this functionality or this architecture, better say. Okay, now we have for user Mizraim for my health insurance tenant. Let's go to tenant section and let's switch to worldwide communications tenant. Okay. Now let's go to the session. You can see the demo, BMC Realm 5, different realm, right? And in the OAuth 2, as we're using a different cookie domain, which is the ltd.com. We're using OAuth 2 authentication. So for the clients, we have it, and the tokens, okay. We have a granted token for demo user pertaining to this BMC5 realm. And this is how we test the logins, different logins. I'm using something really simple, which is ITSM, right? But the purpose of this is to showcase how the multi-tenancy works. And that should cover our task number 4. Let's go back to our presentation. Great. We have gone through our 4 tasks for best practices, configuration steps for multi-tenancy. Now, what I would like to show you lastly is our references that we have for this topic. These are the ones that I personally picked to develop the concept of multi-tenancy. Those links will be shared in the section down below. So I would like to conclude my presentation with a brief summary. So recapping the content we went through. Basically, we started with a multi-tenancy overview. We spoke about the user roles. We discussed and shared the best practices configuration and demo in its 4 different tasks, right? And lastly, well, some of the references that help us to create this demo. So here I conclude my presentation and I get back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Mizraim. And I'll take us through the self-help and contacting BMC. The YouTube channel is listed here. This is where this webinar will be posted a week from today's presentation. Also, it has a rich set of how-to videos to help you with self-solve. And also, the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy schedule for this series is located at this community's link. It has all future as well as past webinars listed. And the hot off the press newsletter that has a lot of trending information. It's released monthly, can be found at this community's link. To contact technical support via web, phone, email, or these social channels, they're listed. And this concludes this month's Connect with Remedy. Thank you very much for joining.